My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
I'm Norman Solomon, and this is The Blue Road to Trump Hell. I'm speaking with Jeff Cohen, co-founder and policy director at RootsAction. He's a media critic, columnist, documentary filmmaker, and retired journalism professor who founded the media watch group FAIR in 1986. For years, he was a regular pundit on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, discussing issues of media and politics. He's the author of Cable News Confidential, My Misadventures in Corporate Media. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Great to be with you, Norman.
Well, let's start with your perspective on how we got on the blue road to Trump hell. How was it that this demonstrably flawed candidate, Donald Trump, discredited in so many ways, could be returned to the White House?
I think it's an answer that requires decades of history. In some ways, Trump is an aberration. He's such an unusual, reckless, narcissistic individual. On the other hand, if it wasn't Trump, it would have been someone else, perhaps someone more effective at governing. But I think that the history begins when you contrast the two parties. You see that the Republican Party is more of a coherent party. You have these devoted, hardcore activists, decade after decade, that have been integrated into the Republican Party and has made them a more effective party in many ways than the Democrats. It began in the 80s when the conservative evangelicals, the religious right, was integrated in the party. And those were some very talented, hardcore volunteers and activists. Then later you had Gingrich, and then you had the Tea Party activists. And in the last 10 years, you've had, the sort of the xenophobic nationalist activist of the MAGA movement. And there's not this disconnect between the leadership of the Republican Party and the hardcore activists willing to knock on doors, willing to be online, fighting for their often horrific viewpoints and policies. On the other hand, the Democratic Party is continuously in disunity. And Norman, you've written about this so well. For decades, there's been this struggle between the most talented progressive activists who are very good at electing people, but they are pushed away by the party leadership. And there's been this disconnect. You can go issue by issue. The Green New Deal, the climate movement was something that really was important in the last 15 years. A lot of young people joined it. And they've got the Green New Deal, which is an important plan that integrates addressing climate with providing jobs and uplifting the poor and good union jobs. And it's the Green New Deal. And how did Democratic Speaker Pelosi react? She referred to it as the Green Dream, or whatever they call it, unquote. I mean, not only would she not look at the actual details of the idea, which could be very popular from West Virginia to West Side Manhattan, she didn't even get the name right. And you could go issue by issue. Healthcare, the base of the party, again, the talented activists who know how to do activism. They've for years wanted a universal health care program, single payer. It's now called Medicare for All. And that movement has been big since the early 1990s, when Bill and Hillary Clinton blocked them, pushed them away, and instead of single payer Medicare for all, Hillary Care was a complex, bureaucratic, corporate plan that was so complicated it never got out of committee for a vote. And then about 15 years later, Obamacare. What was that? Well, it originated from the right-wing Heritage Foundation, was refined by Republican governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney, and that's what was pushed forward instead of Medicare for all, which was supported by 100 Democratic members of Congress, labor unions and local labor unions. Obama's personal physician, Dr. Quentin Young, was one of the leading advocates of Medicare for all for decades. And yet, they pushed it away. We get Obamacare, and we have millions of people that to this day, Obamacare keeps the private insurance companies with a stranglehold over healthcare. There were virtually no price controls, and we have tens of millions of people without health insurance or who are very underinsured. So you look at the what happened in this October government shutdown, the recent government shutdown, and you have the Republicans fighting to push even more people off of insurance, to make private health insurance under Obamacare even more expensive by denying subsidies. And what are the Democrats fighting for in the government shutdown? The very ineffective, very dysfunctional healthcare status quo that in many ways the Democrats helped create. And so that's the difference, Norman, that the base of the Republican Party, the activists, the ones who are ready to do the door knocking and make the phone calls, they've been welcomed in decade after decade into the Republican Party, whereas the very donor influenced, corporate influenced Democratic leadership has a history of pushing the progressive activists away from the party. So you have so often, and Gaza is the last straw. I mean, the activists, whether they come to the Democratic Party as racial justice activists or peace activists, or Muslim activists or Jewish progressive activists, they understood that there was a genocide going on, and it was going on under the Biden-Harris regime. And you get to today where the head of the Senate, the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, is New York State Senator Kristen Gillibrand. And she said in September this year that she believes 9 out of 10 Democrats, she told Jewish leaders, 9 out of 10 Democrats are pro-Israel, she said. Again, how can you be running the Senate Campaign Committee for the Democrats when you're clueless that the polls are showing only 8% of Democrats support Israel's war in Gaza, 75% or more oppose more military aid to Israel, and you have the head of the Senate Campaign Committee for the Democrats utterly disconnected from her own base. So that's the biggest problem. It's what led us to Trump, is that, what happens to these activists that have been pushed away on policy, on one policy after another by the corporate-dominated Democratic leadership? Well, they drift away from the Democratic Party, or they join small left-wing parties that have never elected a member of Congress, or they leave politics. And that's the history of, I think, why we got here.
A positive buzz phrase about the Democratic Party is that it's a big tent. You're looking under the flaps of the big tent, and you're seeing just semi-chaos in terms of lack of cohesion. You could go back to the 1930s where you had the progressive FDR Democrats, and they were in coalition with racist Dixiecrats, and they were supporting the same presidential candidates, for instance. You go to 1948, and there was a split off when the beginning of a civil rights position took hold at the Democratic Convention, and up through the next few decades. How do you think that sifts out in terms of a Democratic Party that, if it existed in Europe, would have had other parties successfully splitting off?
It's a big tent, but it's like you enter the tent in one direction and you have to, it doesn't go in both ways. It's a very flawed big tent. It's why so many talented activists, Norman, you and I have run into them over the decades. People that have worked in the Democratic Party, so talented. They've been driven out of the Democratic Party by the corporate donors. On the Gaza issue, it's these AIPAC donors. They get Republican money. They've driven two Democrats out of Congress, Jamal Bowman from New York and Cori Bush from Missouri. And there's just this complete disconnect where you have a Democratic Party leadership that is very much in a minority position on every issue. Healthcare, most of the party is for Medicare for all. The party leadership, they're against it. Most of the party was for stopping the weapons to Israel as the genocide's going on. The party leadership, they're in league with AIPAC, and they keep supporting it. You can go issue by issue and see that it's not a big tent. It's like a tent where there's a huge hole in the ceiling, and everyone is getting wet, and the activists who are sopping wet are leaving.
There is one unifying position, and that is not liking Republicans.
It's all they've got. There's no doubt about it. That's where the Democrats keep going wrong. Hillary Clinton thought she could defeat Trump by just pointing out how deplorable he was. And he was deplorable, and he is deplorable. Kamala Harris, the same thing. If you don't have a positive agenda, and Norman, you've written column after column about this, if you don't have a positive agenda that can uplift working class people, you can't win elections, even against a candidate as flawed and dishonest and narcissistic, a con man who should be openly seen as a con man as Donald Trump. You have to have a positive vision. Why? If you don't have a pro-working class positive agenda, white working class people will be often prey for a populist like Donald Trump.
A phony pseudo-populist who is part of the tradition of racist, xenophobic pseudo-populism.
Yeah, it comes out of the George Wallace tradition. I mean, we've seen these people that if there's not a progressive pro-working class vision coming out of the Democrats, and you've got a guy like Trump saying, I'm going to bring back manufacturing jobs. The NAFTA deal was the worst trade deal in history. That part of it was true. One of the few true things Trump ever said. You're going to appeal to some white working class people, as he has. And if you don't have this positive uplift, we're going to put the government on the side of working class people. You have a lot of people of color who don't vote, and poor people who don't vote. So it's why you need a positive pro-working class agenda that's clear. Why did Mamdani do so well in New York City? No one had heard of him when he started his campaign in October of last year, October 23rd. He was at 1% or less. And what did he do? He had an agenda that resonated, including with Trump voters in New York. And one of Zoran Mamdani's great videos at the beginning of his mayoral campaign was going on the streets, working class people of all colors. And he found them, and some of them sheepishly said, yeah, they voted for Trump. And he asked them why.
Did you get a chance to vote on Tuesday?
I didn't vote.
And why did you not vote?
Because I don't believe in the system anymore.
And did you get a chance to vote on Tuesday?
Yes!
And who did you vote for?
Trump!
The $1 million question. Trump.
Trump.
Donald Trump. Well, actually, early voted. I voted for Trump.
Honestly, I didn't vote.
She voted for Trump.
I voted for Trump.
And Zoran Mamdani put forward a simple agenda: free universal child care, free buses, freeze the rents in rent-stabilized apartments, Everyone in New York City immediately understood the program, and he defeated a former governor, a multi-term governor, Andrew Cuomo, in the primary and defeated him soundly. So that's I think Zoran Mamdani has shown the need for a real pro-working class agenda, that when I'm in power, I am going to place the power of government on the side of working class, struggling middle class people and the poor. That's how you win elections. You don't do it by talking about how horrible Trump is, and Trump is indeed horrible. You have to add that second thing, which is, here's what we're going to do for working people and struggling middle class people when we're in office. Kamala Harris did not do that, and Hillary Clinton did not do that. And I would argue we could go back further. Al Gore should have beaten Bush. He didn't have an agenda. In fact, there was a huge movement of fair trade activists, anti-corporate globalization activists, massive movement. And they couldn't stand Gore, and they didn't support Gore. And Gore lost a narrow election. 2004, there was a huge anti-war movement. These were talented activists because of the Bush-Cheney invasion of Iraq based on lies. And John Kerry was waffling on the major issue of the Iraq invasion, and he lost, and he should have won. So you find that the modern Democratic Party has lost at the national level so many winnable elections, winnable because all they had to do was integrate their platform with that of the base. And unlike the right wing, unlike the Republicans have got crazy activists who believe all of these things that aren't true about climate and about gender. And I mean, the activists I'm talking about that have been pushed away or driven out of the Democratic Party, those are some serious, well-informed activists. And that was the case with the fair trade movement in 2000 that Gore pushed away from, the anti-Iraq war movement of 2004 that Kerry pushed away from. And it just keeps happening to this day.
What you're describing makes me think about a de facto division of labor in the National Democratic Party as it works out, where people in powerful party positions, elected officials in Congress and so forth, they have a certain role. They schmooze with the donors. They make all sorts of compromises, to put it mildly, with corporate power. And then the division of labor involves grassroots people who are supposed to send money and volunteer.
Right. And have no impact on what that policy is, which is shaped by the leadership along with their donors. I mean, the brilliance of the Bernie Sanders campaigns and the AOC campaigns and Zoran Mamdani, you don't need corporate donors anymore with the internet. If you've got a program that resonates with working class and middle class people, you can get lots and lots of small donations. So yes, Norman, there's that complete disconnect where you have this party elite that is allied with the donor class, and you have the people at the base that are being asked to send more money, send their volunteer hours, even if they have no influence over what the party stands for. I've got one final thought, and Norman, you and I have been in this since the Jesse Jackson presidential campaigns of the 1980s, if not earlier. We were in the Bernie Sanders campaigns. And what we've seen is the Democratic leadership is far more forceful, more cutthroat, more effective when fighting the Democratic left than they are when fighting the Republican right. It's so clear to me when I see the knives that were out for Bernie on behalf of Hillary, and And we've seen it just so often that the Democratic leaders, they're just utterly cutthroat when it comes to fighting the Democratic left. And they seem to be completely wimpified, cowardly when they're trying to defeat the Republican right. It's something that's sickened me in recent years.
The name of this podcast is The Blue Road to Trump Hell, which is also the title of my new book, which is free online, The Blue Road to Trump Hell at blueroad.info. And Jeff, I want to ask you, not only in retrospect, but of special importance, looking ahead, how can Democrats get off the road to electing demagogues, dangerous officials like Donald Trump?
We need a new Democratic Party leadership. We need the Hakeem Jeffries and the Schumers and the Gillibrands, who crazily believes 9 out of 10 Democrats are pro-Israel. We need to remove these people from power. And, people have always said to me, when you remove these people from power and they're connected to the donors, where will you get your money? And the Bernie Sanders campaign has shown where you get your money. So did AOC. So has Zoran Mamdani. Zoran Mamdani was raising so much money, he was breaking the limits on the campaign finance within New York City. He was getting matching funds in a matter of weeks. So we need a new leadership of the Democratic Party.
Jeff, you uniquely, as a progressive media critic, have also worked inside these outlets such as MSNBC, Fox, CNN, as a on the payroll pundit. And from that vantage point, and as an activist and media critic, what about the interplay, I want to ask you, between activism, the Democratic Party leadership, and these corporate media outlets?
Well, I've got to say this. I spent years at FAIR trying to convince news shows on television that if they included a progressive point of view, a pundit or two that had a point of view that millions of people might resonate with, their ratings would go up. And, I basically struck out. I couldn't get a lot of progressive voices on mainstream TV. I was one of the rare ones. But something happened in 2015. Bernie Sanders, enunciating a progressive agenda that many of us had been supportive of for years and years and years, he was the breakthrough. He was the pundit I'd been trying to get on national TV. And because he ran such an effective primary campaign in 2015, 2016, he's getting on Meet the Press. That never happened, progressive on Meet the Press. And he's enunciating a progressive viewpoint. So, the reality is that the bias of corporate news media is going to be toward the narrow corporate spectrum that goes from the corporate Democratic leadership of a Schumer to the right-wing corporate Republican Party. And their instinct is to exclude that half of the spectrum that resonates, whether they're independents or Democrats or progressives or Democratic Socialists. That's their instinct, is to exclude those voices. But what the Bernie Sanders movement has shown, and Bernie Sanders campaigns, is how if you get through the mainstream media with the progressive agenda, all of these people that don't know they're progressive, don't know what a Democratic Socialist is until they heard the words Bernie Sanders, they start resonating. And Bernie was getting huge amounts of donations from working people at Walmart, because you have to list who your employer is when you make a small donation. And the same thing has happened in New York City. I'm watching the corporate news media in New York City. The debate just happened. A Republican, Cuomo running as an independent, and Zoran Mamdani as the Democratic candidate for mayor. And Zoran Mamdani dominated the debate. The journalists were tough on it, all the candidates, and brought up things from their past and quotes from their past. But Zoran has made a breakthrough. I mean, you can't be a credible news outlet, and I don't include the right-wing Murdoch New York Post, but you can't be a credible news outlet in New York City without understanding that most of the city is for Zoran Mamdani. So that's the interplay, I think, Norman, that you're asking me about, is when a progressive demonstrates that there's millions of people behind them and their ideas, as bad as the ownership is of corporate news, and as bad as some of the executives are in corporate news, and it's only getting worse, they understand that their readers, viewers, and listeners include all of these supporters of Zoran Mamdani. So that's the key, is if you change the political calculus of who's winning elections, it will even change I think, some of the coverage in corporate news outlets.
Overall, might it be that Democratic Party leaders, and for that matter, rank and file Democrats, take corporate media too seriously and take their cues from those media outlets?
No doubt about it, that especially corporate leadership of the Democratic Party is tied at the hip with the New York Times, NPR, PBS, MSNBC, the networks. There's no doubt they take their cues. And too many activists who know better, they end up watching MSNBC every night. It's owned by Comcast, so one of the horrific media conglomerates. So the important thing, I think, and a lot of activists know it, if they're working in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party or in progressive social movements, they know they have to support independent media, that they can't trust corporate media, and that they shouldn't be overly influenced by the messages that come out of corporate news media. I think that activists constantly are getting an education to why they can't trust corporate media. You had all of these activists in the Stop the Genocide in Gaza movement. Many of them were Jewish, being called anti-Semites in mainstream media on CNN. And so every time there's social movement, those activists in those movements get a real learning experience about why you need to support independent media and why you shouldn't even be subliminally influenced by the messages of that come out of corporate media. They are generally not your friend.
I've been speaking with Jeff Cohen, co-founder and policy director of RootsAction. This is The Blue Road to Trump Hell, hosted by me, Norman Solomon, executive produced by Harrison Melkin, music by R.J. Eskow. My new book is The Blue Road to Trump Hell, How Corporate Democrats Paved the Way for Autocracy. You can download it for free at blueroad.info.